I'm going to do my first installment on Derrida of Grammatology. I'm going to be doing the first part, which is reading before the letter, but I'm going to be just doing discussing the first of these sections in this, which is kind of trying to bring the whole thing together and discuss it in a certain way as to what this book is about, and trying to get into it, because then following this first section we will have an idea of what this book is about, and we can kind of go into studies, I guess. So Derrida of Grammatology is basically a toolbox for deconstruction. It's your tool of linguistics and grammatology, which you can use to deconstruct anything, whether it be using that in linguistics or literary theory or philosophy or anything really. So, in the intro to this here, we have the problem of language, and is the problem of language, and as the problem of language has to do with meaning itself. What does it mean for one thing to mean something? And prior to Derrida, we had this structuralist idea of meaning, which was of the sign, signifier and signified, and we reference this whole structuralistic linguistics of Fernand de Saussure, and also prior to before him, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau had, it wasn't really structuralist linguistics, but it was logocentric. But we had Saussure, we had Claude Lévi-Strauss and his structural anthropology, but generally in linguistics and philosophy, we had this idea of the sign, and he's going to kind of discuss how the idea of the sign itself breaks down, and we can't really use that as to solve any sort of thing about the problem of language at all whatsoever. So, is it a problem of language? Is it a problem among other problems? Among other problems, but it's a main problem. It's a main problem which all the problems are subsumed under. So it's a big deal. Problem of language is central to understanding everything, us, and meaning itself. Inflation of the sign, or language, is the inflation of the sign itself. So we have this idea of the sign, which he's going to try to break down or deconstruct, and show how it's not really useful for any sort of meaning. And he's not really going to give a sort of meaning either. He's sort of show how there's this différence or play between meanings, or marginalizing them between meanings. And like I said, the whole thing between Rousseau and Saussure, as to which is prior speech or writing, he discusses those two quite a bit, and sort of gets into, Saussure is more about how speech is prior to writing, and Rousseau is more about how writing is prior to speech. So that's kind of big there. Signifier, signified, and reference. This whole thing about the sign. And the signifier of the signified is what he's kind of discussing here in the first part. So the signifier of the signifier. This is the written word here. So we have the signifier dog, which of course signifies a certain signified. And we have the double quoted dog, which is a signifier of the sign dog. It kind of shows how writing comprehends language, and that's kind of what Rousseau has been arguing. And also the signified already is a function as signifier. So this play of signified, we can't really show how a signifier isn't a signified, because the signifier and signified are kind of like, they do the same thing and go back and forth. They have this play of signifier, which is what he discusses. He wants to destroy the concept of the sign and its entire logic. Just to break this whole thing down and have a new linguistics, or a new grammatology, and later I'll discuss how his grammatology is a positive science. Logocentrism and metaphysics of presence. Metaphysics of presence is a philosophy or thought process that is about saying there's presence in some certain way that is unavoidable and indubitable. Logocentrism, however, is centered philosophy. Philosophy that is centered on a certain thing, where like Rousseau and Saussure, they are logocentric philosophies. Decentered and he wants a decentered philosophy, a decentered linguistics, where we have this play, we have this arch writing, we have things which helps us to get around this, which helps us to have a linguistics and a grammatology without being a center or logocentric. Logocentrism has to do with logos. Also, so we have this idea of play back and forth, play of signifiers, play of meanings, which is not limitlessness, but it's not free play. It's just this how we kind of deconstruct one thing and we marginalize it, and we do that same way. It's almost similar to the Deleuzian idea of deterritorialization. So in linguistics, we have the phoneme and the grapheme. Phoneme is a sound, grapheme is a written word, and he's trying to discuss as to how that pertains to meaning in language itself. His logos has to do with he wants to sort of think about things apart from that idea of logos or apart from that idea of truth, and that's he discusses how that's rational, and how its writing can be enlarged and radicalized, no longer issuing from a logos, arch writing, destruction and deconstruction, or desedimentation of all significations, having their source is that logos. So logos is where the sign kind of has its structure. Logos is what gives it its structure. He wants to break all of this down. So logos is the whole idea that is basically connected to truth and meaning, and he sort of gives a way which we can have a linguistics or grammatology and have meaning, but via play and trace and decentered and anti-logocentric thought. Sedimentation of signification. That's what logos, truth, and meaning is. It's where we're kind of having the structuralized, stuck way about things in linguistics and in grammatology. So linguistic science, or science of language, cannot hold on to the difference between signifier and signified. So he has this idea of trace, which I've discussed before. Trace is where, when you deconstruct one concept, you have within it a trace of its opposite. So within signifier, if you deconstruct that whole idea, you will find within that signified. Same vice versa. So the sign must be a unity of heterogeneity. So we must have a heterogeneity if we're going to use an idea of science. It cannot be homogeneous. So the whole idea of a structuralist sign, that's presence. That's a metaphysics of presence. With Saussure, Rousseau, Peirce, a lot of those people who did their own structuralist linguistics, Lévi-Strauss. So he kind of does a thing, write the word is, cross it out. So sign is that thing, and he wants to, break the whole idea of is down, the whole idea of equating something with another and sort of breaking down the is, which breaking down presence. And in the second section, linguistics and grammatology, Rousseau, whereas writing is nothing but the representation of speech. The concept of writing should define a field of science. Science of writing should look for its object at the roots of scientificity. So he wants to have this science of language, or general positive science, which we'll discuss later too. A science of science, which has a form of grammatics, the question of the origin of writing versus question of the origin of language. And between Rousseau and Saussure, it's been about trying to figure out which is prior, which represents the whole of language more. And Derrida wants to just break that whole thing down and say that it's neither and yet it's both. The problem of language isn't going to be solved by trying to figure this problem out, because it's not a useful problem to figure out. Also, there's no answer to it. And that's kind of where he brings up the idea of art writing, which is something I want to discuss here too. Linguistics wishes to be a science of language, and the science of linguistics determines language and its field of objectivity. Now, language does have a objectivity. Language does have a specific meaning, and that does come from use, does come from, meanings in general. I don't think it's in philosophy of language. I wouldn't talk about it in a descriptive or, sense. I would talk about it in terms of more of an utterance sort of thing. But in language, we have this objectivity that comes from it, this thing that is objective rather than subjective, because we all use language, and it's a objective thing beyond the subject. And the unity of the phonae and the glossa and the logos, that's phonology. It's about the sounds, and that's also about linguistics, and it's about objectivity and scientificity, and this has to do with science, because we want to have a science of language, and we want to have a science of linguistics and grammatology, and we want to figure out, the idea of phonology and graphology, and figuring out speech and writing, and figuring out what makes a certain words mean something, and we want to get at some sort of idea of what it means, what meaning is. And Derrida isn't really all about that. He does want to have a positive science, which is grammatology or linguistics, but and there is going to be some objectivity, but meaning is going to be essentially difference and differential play back and forth between possible meanings. And the whole idea of linguistics as a science, there's a contradiction with writing as an instrument or speech, in the relationship between speech and writing. This is a whole contradiction here. And what defines the linguistic object? Is it speech or is it writing? We have the outside or the inside. He has the outside is, crosses out the is the inside. And how object's going to try to just break down this whole idea of objective versus subjective. He wants to just destroy that too, because there is no real difference in this whole idea, and saying that there is a difference is logocentric, and it's probably metaphysics of presence as well. He also kind of has the idea of the exterior and interior. Interior is the intelligible, exterior is the sensible. He wants to break that down as well. Right. And there is an internal system of language, which is the inside, and there is the world of speech. There's the word and speech, which is objective and used every single day. So we have this internal idea of language and this external idea of language. He wants to break that whole thing down and sort of make it into this one idea of language, which he wants to sort of figure out. And he wants to have a science about grammatology and linguistics and language. So Saussurean linguistics, which is writing, is unrelated to the internal system of language and how speech is primary. That's logocentric, and it is, metaphysics of presence, because it's kind of giving an outside and the inside. Derrida is not for that either. External language, the word is the sensible spout, want to. And that does speech clothe it in a certain way and sort of make it to be different than the way we had it in our head? And does language sort of taint something, taint our thought? The outside bears with the inside relationship that is anything but simple exteriority. Science of language must recourse natural relationship between speech and writing. It must bring together the relationship between speech and writing, outside and inside. It wants to bring those two things together and sort of figure that out. And now I got to flip my mind up a little bit to get to the last section. All right. Now trace is that which doesn't let itself be summed in its simplicity or presence. It's something that you can't simplify, and he wants to sort of get away from the simplicity. And he has this idea of outside is the inside. Arbitrariness of the sign, the end of the distinction between the linguistic and the graphic sign. This is a regulated play of differences that intend between signs themselves, and which is saying the differences between signs themselves is sort of an arbitrary thing. He's sort of again breaking down or deconstructing the sign. Only natural signs escape semiology as a grammatology, but they yet fall out of linguistics into a general semiology. So we have this idea of the arch writing or the generalized writing. It's a future possibility. It's a pure trace is différence. It's a movement of différence. Irreducible arts, synthes, arch trace. Différence is the formation of form. Trace is the absolute origin of sense in general, and trace is the différence which opens appearance and signification. So the idea of this future possibility of arch writing is where you have pure trace in writing. You don't have this simplicity of presence in your writing. And it's also this whole thing where you don't have any sort of priority of speech or writing. That's why we have that. That's why we have generalized writing, which différence and trace are the main two things in this whole idea of arch writing. Now the idea of hinge. Différence, it differs and it differs. Difference and deferral. And that's time and space. And it's just, how deferral is time, difference is space. And it's deconstructing the simplicity of presence. Spacing as writing is the becoming absent and becoming unconscious of the subject. And it's sort of trying to decenter the subject a little bit as well. Jacques and Lacan both did that. The hinge of language as writing. It's this continuity. Hinge makes the impossibility that a sign, a unity of signifier and signified be produced with a plenitude of a presence and an absolute presence. So, hinge is the idea where language is discontinuous and it is complex. And you can't make it simple by having the sign, or you can't just simplify it in any certain way. And you can't, you can, but it would be wrong to try to give this sign where everything is simple or present, because that's not the way language is. Language is discontinuous. It has a nature of discontinuity to it. I got one more. Alright, last section of On what conditions is a grammatology possible? Its fundamental condition is the undoing of logocentrism. That's what grammatology is for. It's better than a linguistics, better than a graphology or phonology together. It's grammatological knowledge. It's a condition of possibility turns into a condition of impossibility. So it's kind of collapses science here. So the fact that we have a condition of possibility means we have a condition of impossibility. So what is writing, and where does it begin? Where does it begin? And we have this idea of the origin of writing, and it's a question at least more collapsing of certain things too. Meditation on trace shows that there is no origin. Thinking about the idea of trace and how that is a part of writing, how différance and hinge are three things that are part of writing, shows that the idea of where does writing begin, or the origin, that there is none, and that it's a wrong question. And think about a origin itself as a metaphysics presence. In moments of first phenomena of writing, and that's history and archaeology, and that does exist. Like we have hieroglyphics and stuff like that. We have slabs on stone of early writing, but that doesn't give us the whole picture. And essence has to do with origin, and essence is a presence as well. And when and where does it begin? And trace is at the root of writing itself, as we figured out, and we get examples of how it began. Trace exceeds the what is. It's nothing. Thinking about trace itself is beyond presence. It's not. We can't break it down to presence itself. Trace is beyond that. Taking shelter in a field of grammatical knowledge that's outside the question of what is. And historical writing, that's historical, and we do get something from that, but not the entire picture. We still have the fact that the trace is at the very root of writing, and we don't have the whole picture of the origin here. And try to think about that, leads you again to trace, and you really don't get anywhere. Plans for a general history of writing, or a theology of writing, put together. That's one of those in the 1600s and 1700s, which is a split from theologism. So no history of writing could be stuck with this. We wanted to get away from theologism. We want to have no divine element, and have a history of writing would lots of times include that divine element. We want to separate from that. And so a limited decentering, which is can kind of bring us away from a universal grammar. So sure also, and we have a recentered with a universal language. That's not really what we're going to do anyway. And he has the concept of the arcanum, or a mystery. Kind of leads to the whole idea of an aporia as well. Grammatology is an assured path of a science. Grammatology asks, what is the name of man? And it is a positive or a human science. Grammatology and language is a problem about everything, and that does include the idea of who we are as people and man, and who is man, and what man is. Trace is between exterior and kind of going over trace again. It's between exterior and interior. It's between protension and retention. Those are Husserlian terms. And it's also is différance in play. It is breaking down sign and symbol. We can still have symbols or signs, but not in the structural way in which we did before. He wanted to discuss the linearization of grammatology. He wants to end linear writing and leave man and science and the line behind. He wants to leave the man, the science, and the line behind, and that's not a graphology. It's influenced by particularities of mind. That's where, the linear writing comes from. And to understand its system, for you must go over its history. So that's true of all systems of writing, and that's whether it's phonetic or non-phonetic language. And we have a necessary decentering, and that's where we link speech and writing together, and we solve the Rousseau's social problem, and that's found in categories of writing and a grammar of episteme. Episteme is like some things that we know about writing and which we want to build upon, and episteme is a Foucauldian concept too, which I will discuss in the future. Questioning phonetization unties itself, or it unites itself with a science or religion or politics, economics, and so on. And that's not a question we want to, entirely do. The complicity of origins. That's the art writing, the generalized writing. The myth is simplicity of origin. That's arcanon, mystery, the concept of origin. Writing or art writing within the limits of science and philosophy with a historical closure. Constitution of philosophy or science of writing is a necessary yet difficult task. Thought of trace must go beyond the field of episteme, must go beyond what we think we already know, which we probably don't even know it anyway. Incompetence of science and philosophy, which is the closure, the end of the episteme. We don't know. Do no. And we have this play of the system of language, where we have phonetics, grammatology, and linguistics go into the history of writing and language, which kind of shows a snippet of the origin, where the origin is not even a real question in the science of language, leads to the closure of the episteme. And it kind of shows that we want to have a philosophy or a science of writing, which involves trace, art writing, different elements, play, arcanon. Sorry, I've been talking for about a half hour here. And that's kind of where he wants to go in this book. He wants to sort of give a toolbox for deconstruction. Also, he wants to show what linguistic deconstruction really is, but he also wants to solve yet not really solve a lot of issues, and show that some questions are really non-questions, and how and basically the nature of all the problems in the whole world via this one problem of language, which is just really, really fascinating. I could discuss this for a while. Let me know if I've messed up something or butchered something in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Thank you for 900 subs, by the way.